The clock in the Kowalski kitchen didn't tick, it exhaled, a long, weary sigh every second, marking the passage of another day that felt too much like the one before. At its center was Anya, her palms pressed into the cool laminate countertop, her gaze fixed on the single, stubborn bulb illuminating the sink. The grocery list beside her was a brutal ledger: eggs, milk, bread, a note in the margin that read "economy" in her father's firm script. Economy, she muttered to the empty room. It was his favorite word lately, a mantra for hard times. It meant bulk beans, patched knees on school uniforms, and the careful silence that fell when the news mentioned layoffs. Her father, Merrick, had been staring at the same help-wanted ads for weeks, the lines around his eyes deepening into trenches. From the living room, the gentle rustle of tissue paper whispered. Babsha, Anya's grandmother, was at her evening ritual, carefully unfolding the silver foil from a chocolate square, smoothing it on her knee and adding it to her growing pile. For later, she'd wink, though later never seemed to come. The foil stars, Anya thought, were Babsha's own economy, a savings account of tiny, reflected lights. "Anya," Merrick's voice, gravelly with fatigue, cut through her thoughts. "Come hold the ladder, the gutter's weeping again." Outside, the autumn air was crisp with the smell of decaying leaves and distant wood smoke. Anya steadied the aluminum legs as her father stretched into the damp, clogged channel. His flannel shirt, worn soft at the elbows, strained across his shoulders. "Don't just stand there complaining about the cold," he grunted, a half smirk on his face as he scooped out a handful of blackened mulch. "This is all you can handle." It was his refrain, "This is all you can handle." When her backpack strap broke, when the ancient car sputtered, when her younger brother Leo's birthday request was a used video game instead of a new one, it was a challenge, a tease, but lately it felt like the definition of their world, a ceiling pressed low overhead. The story's true heartbeat, however, was in the kitchen at 5:45 p.m. This was when their economy transformed. Merrick, still smelling of damp earth and motor oil, would take his mother's gnarled hands and guide her to the small formica table. Leo would dump out his homework, a cyclone of pencils and frustration, and Anya would begin the ballet of dinner. Tonight, it was bigos, hunter's stew, the economy meal par excellence. It started with the prickling vinegar scent of sauerkraut hitting the old enamel pot, then the sizzle of the last bits of kielbasa, diced impossibly small to stretch. Babsha, her eyes milky but sharp, would point a trembling finger. "The bay leaf, child, now, and not too much paprika. Your grandfather, he always said—" Her voice would trail into memory. Anya added the paprika, a rusty cloud blooming in the steam. The stew was never the same twice. It was a repository for leftovers, a lone mushroom, a handful of wilting carrots, yesterday's roasted potatoes. It simmered for hours, a bubbling, fragrant alchemy that turned scarcity into sustenance. As the bigos bubbled, the small kindnesses unfolded. Leo, without being asked, filled everyone's water glass. Merrick quietly replaced the battery in Babsha's talking clock. Anya saved the smallest, most tender piece of sausage from the stew and slipped it onto her father's plate when he wasn't looking. They were silent transactions in the economy of care, a currency they were all rich in. The following Saturday, the ceiling felt lower than ever. The car had failed its inspection. The repair estimate might as well have been a ticket to the moon. Merrick announced a family outing, his voice tight. They drove in tense silence to the sprawling, fluorescent-lit bulk superstore, a temple to a different kind of economy. "Stick to the list," Merrick instructed, his jaw set. The list was pitifully short. They moved in a grim convoy, Merrick steering the cart like a tank commander, Leo casting long looks toward the electronics aisle, Babsha clutching her reusable bags, and Anya calculating unit prices until her brain ached. In the rice aisle, the crash was deafening. A towering, beautiful pyramid of tomato sauce jars, a display of vibrant red and yellow labels, now lay in a chaotic, glistening sea of shattered glass and pooling sauce. In the center of the disaster stood Babsha, a single jar rolled from her hand, unbroken. Her face was a mask of utter horror, her eyes wide, fixed on the carnage at her feet. A young store employee, a guy with a name tag reading Chad and an expression of pure dismay, rushed over. A manager, a pinched woman with a headset, materialized. "Ma'am, are you hurt? What happened?" Her voice was sharp, echoing off the high ceilings. Babsha couldn't speak. She just stared at the ruin, her breath coming in short, panicked hitches. Merrick stepped forward, his face pale. "I'm so sorry. It was an accident. We'll pay for it." His voice was low, humiliated. The cost of that display would be their grocery budget for a month. Chad, the staffer, was on his knees with a dustpan, carefully avoiding the manager's gaze. Then he looked up at Babsha. He saw not a clumsy old woman, but the trembling hands, the old-fashioned wool coat buttoned wrong, and the profound shame in her eyes. He saw Merrick's stiff posture, Anya's protective arm around her brother, and the cart with its meager contents. The manager began reciting policy, liable for damages, incident report. Chad stood up. He cleared his throat. "Actually, Denise," he said, his voice surprisingly firm, "it was my fault." The manager blinked. "What?" "Yeah, I was restocking the opposite shelf. My dolly clipped the base of the display. I must have knocked it unstable. This lady just barely touched it when it went." He spoke smoothly, meeting the manager's gaze. "I'll clean it up and fill out the damage log." The stunned silence that followed was profound. The manager's mouth opened, then closed. She looked from Chad's earnest face to Babcha's tear-filled one, to the family holding on to each other. The store's harsh lights seemed to soften. The other shoppers, who had paused to gawk, slowly moved on. "You're sure, Chad?" the manager asked, skepticism warring with relief at having a simple, employee-related solution. "Positive," he said, already grabbing more paper towels. He glanced at Marek and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Don't say a word." Marek's shoulders, which had been holding the weight of the sky, slumped in sheer, disbelieving relief. Babcha finally moved, reaching out one trembling, age-spotted hand and placing it over Chad's on the cart handle. She didn't speak, she just pressed. And in that press was a universe of gratitude, a transmission of grace that bypassed words. On the drive home, the silence was different. It was warm, filled with an unspoken wonder. They had witnessed a miracle in aisle 7, not a burning bush, but a human one, a sudden, shocking flare of kindness that changed the composition of the very air. That night, the bigos tasted different. It was the same pot, the same leftovers, but the aroma seemed richer, the flavors deeper. As they sat around the table, the tender meat falling apart, the sour tang of cabbage balanced by sweet onion, a new feeling settled over them. It wasn't that their problems had vanished. The car was still broken, the job ads were still thin, but the low ceiling had been lifted. Not by money, but by a stranger's lie that said, "You are seen and you are not alone." "You know," Marek said, stirring his stew slowly, "my father used to say that bigos is best on the 3rd day, after all the flavors have found each other." He looked around the table, at his mother saving her foil star, at his son now laughing at a silly joke, at his daughter whose eyes were no longer tired but thoughtful. I think he was right. Anya understood. Their life was like the stew. It needed time. It needed all the disparate, sometimes bitter, sometimes sweet pieces to simmer together until they became something wholly new and nourishing. The economy of scarcity had been countered forever by the economy of connection, a currency that multiplied when spent. Later, as Anya washed the dishes, she watched her father in the backyard. He was under the gutter again, not with the ladder, but planting a bulb by the pale glow of the porch light. A tulip, maybe, something for spring. He patted the earth firm, then looked up at the house, meeting her gaze through the window. He didn't smirk, he simply smiled, a slow, quiet thing that reached his eyes. In that moment, Anya knew the true caption of their story. It wasn't about the complaint or the burden. It was about what happened after. It was about the stunned, grateful silence that follows grace. and the profound truth that what we can handle together is so much more and so much more beautiful than we ever could alone. The story wasn't in the sigh of the clock, but in the heartbeat between the ticks. It was in the shared meal, the saved chocolate foil, the lie that set them free, and the stubborn planting of a flower in the gathering dark. It was, and would always be, enough.